everyone. You're live.
And welcome back to Voices of Santa Barbara. I'm your host for the day, Mark McIntire. And I can tell you that today's program is going to be both enlightening, educational, and entertaining. So wherever you are on the Central Coast, welcome back to Voices of Santa Barbara. My special guest today is a successfully published author of United States revolutionary naval history. And the reason for inviting Tim McGrath on, my guest, is because he has just released his latest book. And as you can see, it's not a walk in the park, okay? It is a robust tome. And we're going to spend the entire hour with interviewing Tim. So Tim, I want to welcome you to Santa Barbara virtually.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's nice to see you again, and it's an honor to be on the show.
Oh, everybody's been waiting for this interview. I've been telling all my friends, all three of them, and they're all lined up to do this. But first of all, I want to just briefly remind the audience, in case they are not avid fans of American history, probably because American history is not taught anymore in high schools or elementary schools, along with American civics. But Tim received his Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Temple University in 1974. And I think I was still teaching in Massachusetts at that time. And then he has been writing ever since. The three books that I'm aware of course, are the one that I'm reading now, James Monroe, just off the presses here at Random Penguin. And his first book was, which I also have acquired, thanks to Tim, Give Me a Fast Ship. All right. Which really set him on a track to enter the top echelon of American historians. I really believe the Monroe book is going to put you in that category. I'm not going to mention the other two, but I think that you will be in 1, 2, or 3. One of those three. It's a fantastic read. I find that I'm reordering my day just so I can make the time to read this book. It's amazing. So welcome to the show. How are you, first of all? How are you doing?
I'm fine, sir, and yourself. Hope everybody in your listening audience is safe and healthy.
Good. The first question I have for you is, now that you've got your third major work published, let's begin at the beginning. How did you become a writer and an author of American naval revolutionary history? How did that happen?
All by circumstance, Mark. I was not a good student from the first day of grade school to last college. I had my head out the window and spent most of my time at Temple trying to see if I had one decent shot at making the starting baseball team. There's a library named after my dad at the veterinary school at Penn. He obviously paid a little more attention than I did. But I was not a good student. I did enjoy, though, the independent studies that were offered that you could get credits for. And there was a teacher professor, thanks to the aging process, he's gone from being a mentor to a peer, Jim Hilty, Marine, and played football at Ohio State and showed up at Temple 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And he was working on a book on President Kennedy, which would be obviously something near and dear to your heart and your experiences.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
wonderful one-man show I was lucky enough to see way back when. I did President Kennedy in the 4th grade presidential debate. My hairline was better then. You're still in good shape.
Well, see, you're in Philadelphia. I'm from Boston. We drink a lot of beer, Irish beer, so that keeps the hair going.
I'll try to remember that now. But
so you took Kennedy's role in college?
4th grade? No, 4th grade.
4th grade.
In October of 1960, Mother Rachel decided there would be a presidential debate.
Mother Rachel.
Yes.
Wow.
And she told me I would be Senator Kennedy.
Uh-huh.
And my friend Fred, who I'm sure taught Bill Gates everything he knows, was picked to play Vice President Nixon. And I jumped into my research, and I'd already seen the first couple of debates, and I knew that it wasn't just enough to say, let's get this country moving again. But I researched the recession and the space race and the arms race and the prevalent issue of Quemoy Matsu. And I was pumped and thought I was ready. And walking to school the day of the debate, a sixth grader, Anita Popola, who the basketball star, she fired the ball like this, and it went into it went through the hoop out of fear. He did tell me that, if Nixon's elected, he wants us all to go to school on Saturdays. And I just said, that's totally untrue.
Oh, wow.
And was ready. But so was Fred. In the debate, Fred pointed out that we would win the space race because the German scientists we had captured were much better than the German scientists the Soviets had captured. You could not mend the recession or fix the recession by something Democrats loved I'd never heard of called deficit spending. And we were not really behind in the arms race. That was strictly political claptrap. And it was important to recognize the issue of Quemoy and Matsu by their longitudes and latitudes. Fred knew their longitudes and latitudes. I was getting clobbered.
Really?
But finally, when Mother Rachel said, each of you have a minute to summarize your case, Vice President Fred went first. And he said, it's important that we elect someone with this kind of experience. And I would like to tell you, as Winston Churchill said in the last analysis, that a democracy like America is very poor government, but it is still the best one we have yet seen. So I just stood up and said that if Vice President Nixon is elected, we will all go to school on Saturdays. And the classroom was in shock and awe. Mother Rachel asked where I got that information. I said from someone older than myself. Kennedy won in a walk, and I retired from politics.
So you went into history.
Yes. But about almost 20 years ago, I came across the papers of Commodore John Barry, whose statue is behind Independence Hall. And you were talking about being an Irishman in Massachusetts, who all the Irish know down here and call the father of the American Navy. And it was a remarkable discovery, Mark. His story read like the Captain Hornblower books my dad had that I read as a kid, or the Patrick O'Brien novels that, everybody has been reading the last 30 years. Yeah. And I called Jim, who was by then the dean at Temple's Ambler campus, and said, look, if you've got a graduate student that can't come up with something for his thesis or his doctorate, you can't make this guy's story up. So Jim invited me to come meet with him. And he said, here's how you do it. You write an article, and that's an academic version of saying you have dibs on the subject. And then you work on the research in the evenings, like 10 to 2, and then on weekends. And I was like, I wasn't talking about me doing this. And Jim just said, you never applied yourself. This can be your penance. And it turned out to be a wonderful ride. A very nice guy, a really sharp publisher locally, Bruce Franklin, was an editor, I think, at the University of Chicago and then at Penn. And he started his own publishing company doing history and sports. Mm-hmm. And he expressed an interest in it at the same time that a really terrific literary agent, Jim Donovan, had reached out and said, I have a New York publisher interested in your Barry book. And I said, well, we shook hands just yesterday. But the Barry book came out and did nicely. And then Jim got us linked up with Penguin and with a wonderful editor, Brent Howard. And so that was where Give Me a Fast Ship came out. And then we moved on from there.
And the rest, as they say, is history, right? The rest, as they say, is history. Yep. You're Brett at your editor. I always read. I read books backwards. I'm sort of dyslexic in that sense. I read the acknowledgement page for the book, the James Monroe book, where you paid a great tribute to Brett, your editor at Random House. And I got to tell you, the quote and the acknowledgement you gave him, and that he gave you, actually, is accurate. In the two books that I have now read of yours, Tim, you do not waste one word, unlike me, and I waste almost as many words as are important. I haven't learned how to write like you do. And we're going to talk about how you write in one of our segments here today, because I think that a lot of students will be profiting by this broadcast, and we'll actually get some insights. So now they know how to start writing. They go to a college or a university, and they talk to the chair of one of the departments, especially in history, and the rest is there. So. Who are the writers of, before we get into your work with Monroe, who are the writers, the historical writers that you really admire, and why?
It's a good question, and we'll probably run this program out just by naming so many of them.
Well, let's say the top three.
The first grown-up book I read, I guess it was 10 or 11, was Barbara Tuchman and the Guns of August.
Oh, yeah.
And that was just so good, and even as a fourth grader, it was something that you could jump into and really enjoy. Mm-hmm. And I read an essay of hers some years ago, right before I started working on the Commodore Barry book, where she was graduating from Wellesley, and a professor of hers said, "So where are you going now? What are you going to do?" And she said, "I want to write history." And the professor said, "That's a wonderful idea, dear. You just have to remember the answer to one question. Will the writer turn the page?" And when I started working on the Barry book, I took a snippet of paper and wrote that out and stuck it on the desk, and just to make sure I would remember that.
Hold that thought, Tim. We're going to take our first break. One of 5 breaks that we're going to take, but hold that thought. When we come back, we'll pick up where we left off. Is where and who and why are the writers that Tim McGrath actually admires. Stay tuned here on KZSB AM 1290 Central Coast News Talk Radio. Okay, we're back, and that was quick. We were discussing before the break with my special guest today, one of the eminent American Revolution naval historians. Something tells me that now he's actually branching out into presidential history with his newest book, which I will now promote again by showing you that I'm actually just finished reading it, James Monroe, A Life, published by Random House. Before the break, Tim was telling us who he admired, and Barbara Tuchman was the first person that he had mentioned. And he also mentioned how he scratched down some advice that came from reading that experience, and that was, don't abuse the reader. Don't abuse the reader. So who else is are you a fan of, Tim?
Well, early on, Mark, certainly Bruce Catton. I was turning 9 when the Civil War Centennial came about in the early 60s, and got to read everything of his. And William Manchester, certainly starting with the death of a president. But it's funny, both Brent, the editor, and Jim Donovan, my agent, who is a wonderful writer, he's written 3 terrific books, one on Custer and the Little Bighorn, one on the Alamo, and a phenomenal book that just came out a year or 2 ago on Shoot for the Moon, about the moon landing, that Buzz Aldrin said was the best book on the moon landing he'd come across.
Really?
But the 3 of us are all in love with the first 40 pages of William Manchester's The Last Lion, the first volume of his Churchill trilogy.
Yep.
And it's just remarkable, the ability of putting all that together.
What are the qualities that you look for when you read history? We're getting a sense of it now. First of all, don't waste any words. Secondly, don't bore your reader. But what are the qualities you look for in other writers?
Well, most of the time, it's not just what qualities am I looking for, but what qualities what writers I look up to. Mm-hmm. And certainly David McCullough, who I think showed there's a lot of give and take, and I know some of it makes sense about don't use quotations. And to me, if you're buying a book about a biography, let's say, or a historical event, wouldn't you rather hear what the people thought or said in their own words rather than listen to someone 50 to 200 to 2,000 years later, sum them up? And so certainly Mr. McCullough, Nathaniel Philbrick is a phenomenal writer and a much better sailor than I will ever be. John Meacham's books are good. And the fact that he has a really good grasp of what the gist of the story is and stays pretty true to it. Again, like I said, with Jim Donovan, with Jim's books, he's a great storyteller, and he'll focus on, which I found really fascinating, a lesser known or maybe not even known individual in each of his books. And so when he's up and dealing with Custer and Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, there's an officer whose story wends its way through. He did that with the Alamo, and he did that with a NASA engineer in Shoot for the Moon. And it really gave you an idea of, not just somebody who's present at the event, but what they were like and what it was like for this guy to come home and say, well, we're not done yet. We're still having to work on this. And it really makes it a personal story. And I think that does it, and again, the Tuckman quote, that's perfect.
Before we dive into the purpose for our interview is the release of the James Monroe A Life book. Can you help us out by giving us some idea of how you write? I was interested because I was doing some research on Shelby Foote, who is the historian for the Civil War, and David McCullough, who's an American historian. And since you're now in that echelon, people are going to want to know how you actually write. Do you write longhand like Shelby Foote does, and then type it up? How do you write? How do you do that?
Well, it's very kind of you to say that. I don't consider myself at that level, but it gives you something certainly to aspire to. I read years ago that Hemingway wrote his novels, the first draft in longhand and the second draft typing. And when someone asked him why he did that, he said, because I don't type well. I neither write well or type well. For a guy who went to...
Somebody mentioned that you're a bad typist. In one of the reviews, he was kidding, of course. It was from the Publisher's Daily review, which I'm going to try to share the screen in a bit. But so all of us have little foibles. I mean, with me, it's spelling. I can't spell to save my life. I use a lot of fancy words. People assume that I know how to spell them, but I'm really terrible at it,
Well, I can spell, but for a guy who was raised by nuns in the 50s and 60s and Palmer method in terms of handwriting, my handwriting's terrible. I am left-handed.
Oh.
And the second grade teacher was supposed to teach me to teach right-handed, moved to fourth grade. And the nun who substituted was also left-handed. So I can blame Mother Magdalene, but it's still, students knew, high school, whatever, oh, he's good at history. And I can still remember people that, right before a history class saying, can I look at your notes from yesterday? And I hand them to them. They go, I can't read this. And well, neither can I, I wrote that yesterday. But my typing is getting better. I'm probably up to 5 words a minute now. And that's if they're all 4 letters or less. But do
you keep a sketchbook? Some writers keep a sort of a notebook or sketchbook. As I'm making mine, I have a notebook here. This is what I use. I use one of these things as I'm reading your book. I've got copious notes on it. Do you do that? Do you sort of like sketch?
Yeah. In fact, I'll show and tell time. These are notes on the papers of General George Meade. Because we're doing a book on Meade and
I heard about
Gettysburg.
Yeah.
And Meade is just fascinating, but I find myself scribbling. And then what you want to do now that I've did this over the weekend is at some point translate this gibberish, saying that look this up on page 16 of his letter to his wife in 1861 or something.
Right.
But yeah, you constantly have something on the side.
Yeah.
and trying to do it.
Yeah.
I have to interject, though, in terms of you're talking about no wasted words. I am wonderfully blessed with who agreed to marry me. Sid was an English major, and when I asked her with the Barry book, would you read these? And knowing her, that she would give a very honest and get into it. And when we started Give Me a Fast Ship, I had said to Jim, he said, I don't have to correct much here. And I said, that's because of Sid. And he goes, well, what? And he goes, well, Sid reads these chapters before I send them. And he goes, well, that's really nice of her to do. But, you know, your spouse isn't really going to be picking on you. She's not going to, she or he is going to say, oh, that's wonderful, dear. Keep up the good work.
Right.
And I was like, well, you don't know Sid. So at one point I sent him a chapter. I scanned the pages she had gone through, and I sent that along with the chapter I corrected after that. And mark at least 5 pages in each chapter written across the whole page is land the plane.
Yes, it is Tim's in-house consigliere who keeps him towing the line. You know, English majors they're tough to deal with. They grammatically and syntactically they're terrorists. They actually are terrorists.
And the other thing is that her handwriting is pristine, like her father. He was a nose cone designer for NASA and GE, and he had he could have written the Declaration of Independence on a pinhead.
Okay.
And Sid has the same.
Yeah.
Anyway, a Saturday after I sent.
We're going to take a little break here, Jim. I'm already calling you Jim Monroe. You're taking on the personality of President Monroe. Anyway, we're going to take a little break here. And when we come back, we're actually going to get down to business on the James Monroe book. I am Mark McIntire. This is Voices of Santa Barbara, right here on KZSB AM 1290. Do not go away. And we're back with Tim McGrath, the author of the recently published James Monroe, A Life, published by Random House. And you can see I've been plowing my way through it, and I just can't, it's a real page turner. So my first question in this segment is, why did you pick James Monroe as the person that you were going to write this book on? Why James Monroe?
Well, Brent Howard, our editor with Penguin, he now heads up the Dutton publishing part of Penguin. As you know, all the publishing that's merged and everything else.
Yeah.
So he was initially with New American Library under Penguin, and now he's the senior editor for Dutton. But when Fast Ship was done, he said, let's think a little bigger. Let's talk about a president or someone like that. Mm-hmm. I brought up George Marshall, and he just edited a book on Marshall. And then he brought up Harry Truman, and I just said, really, after David McCullough, a book on Truman, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, that's going to be different.
But he said, well, think about it. And the thought occurred to me, if we could do a smaller, a 400-page book about maybe the fact that Truman never left the battlefield after he returned from World War I, at least his approach to foreign policy was concerned. And Brent liked that, but then got back to me and said that there was a forthcoming book by a professor, a lady's an expert on Truman. And he just went, pick another president. And I immediately said, James Monroe. And he said, why? And I said, because when I was 7 years old, he was my favorite president. I'd been to Valley Forge, and the park ranger had told us about that, Monroe had been a soldier there, had almost lost his life months earlier in a battle at Trenton. And we bought a book on presidents leaving the tourist shop. And so I got interested in James Monroe. As a history major, I certainly knew where he fit into our story and what he did, and obviously the doctrine. But to be honest with you, Mark, I once I got started on the research, I realized I didn't know enough about him to hurt me, and was ably helped by 3 wonderful experts and their teams down in Virginia. But the more I got into his story, the more fascinated I was. I mean, this guy was everywhere and was involved in just about every aspect of the beginning 50 years of our country. And
Well,
a young Luke.
in your book, I think you write this book from the position that James Monroe actually um, took part in the post-revolutionary, being the fifth president of the United States. He actually took part in many of the events that created the nation that we have now. The nation that he worked on after the revolution um, uh, seems to reflect what we now have been living through. I would say probably since, oh, I don't know, probably since Woodrow Wilson, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, I think that's accurate. He really is. He's elected at 25 to, he's already been an assemblyman for Virginia. He's been trained as a lawyer by Thomas Jefferson. He becomes a very ardent supporter as a Jeffersonian Republican. And he serves at very young ages, both as a congressman and senator during the Articles of Confederation, which he is not happy with. He can see the foibles of it.
Yeah.
But it's funny when when they picked the Virginia delegates to go to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, he is not picked by the Virginia higher-ups, and he's a little annoyed about it.
Yeah.
And his other friend Madison tries to explain to him, look, you just got married, you don't have any money, nobody's getting paid to be up here. And when it is done, and it's down to Virginia to be ratified, the leader against ratifying the Constitution is Patrick Henry, who just thinks this is too much power for a federal government to have.
Right.
And Monroe is not supportive because there's no Bill of Rights to it. So he says, hey, photogenic, war hero, smart kid, I'll make him the front person for this. And Monroe gets very involved in the debates. And at one point he talks about the impeachment of a president and says, so he can be tried for high crimes and misdemeanors, but who's going to be trying him? His peers? Where is this going? And then he says, and what might happen by a foreign country, meaning Great Britain, Spain, or France, through their guiles and intrigue, can they reach in and take over control or influence of the president or his advisors or both? And this is like 200 and some years before Vladimir Putin and Paul McCartney right back in the USSR. I mean, it's that strong a message of his.
Yeah.
And then Washington picks him to be the ambassador to France at the tail end of the Reign of Terror. He's later sent by Jefferson to go back and broker that real estate deal we call the Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah.
It just goes on that side for him. And he's really as dedicated a public servant as we have.
Well, we're going to take another break. And I know these breaks come up very, very quickly. We hardly give you time to explain yourself, but we're going to pick up in our next segment. We're going to pick up what do you hope? What does Tim McGrath hope that the reader of James Monroe, A Life, will take away? And how your book echoes and mirrors some of the partisanship difficulties that we're experiencing now. So stand by, folks. We're here with Tim McGrath, the author of James Monroe, A Life. I am Mark McIntire. We're here on KZSB AM 1290. Stay with us. Living in the shadow of, I mean, let's face it, George Washington was still alive for some of the adulthood of James Monroe. And certainly Jefferson was a very close friend of James Monroe. And certainly some of his adversaries, including Mr. Adams and Mr. Hamilton. So do you think that your book is shedding any light, is a good thing for us to read, to see that partisan politics can be very, very nasty and can be vituperative? And as invidious as it is insidious, which seems to be where we are right now. So what do you think that the reader should take away from your book? Because I found all those things in your book.
Great question, Mark, and you're exactly right. I was, amazed. I knew there was a depth of, partisanship that started almost immediately. I mean, for goodness sakes, Jefferson's supporter, this one fellow Callender, who was sort of like the Drudge Report of the colonial era.
Yeah.
They're calling Adams a hermaphrodite. But ironically, James Monroe was as partisan as they come. I mean, he was uber partisan. If he was alive today, Mark, depending on the political issue, he would have been on MSNBC or Fox News every darn night.
Certainly Tucker Carlson. Yeah.
He just was one of these folks that there's I'm right and you're not. And what do I need to do to make sure you don't have any sway on the issues?
One of the things I would recommend your book for, especially to young people in elementary school and high school, it's very readable for that audience, believe me, is that if you really want to know the roots of the Democrat Party, the modern day Democrat Party, and the roots of the modern day Republican Party, your book is an ideal tractatus concerning that particular thing, because we're going through that now. There doesn't seem to be much elbow room or bipartisanship spirit. They hate each other and they want to destroy each other. Just like Monroe was hunted down almost literally by Hamilton and the Federalists.
No, that's true. He had gone to before he went to France. Monroe was one of three members of Congress that approached Alexander Hamilton in Philadelphia one night and said that Congress was going to investigate him for misprision of funds. And Hamilton was like, yeah, fine, go ahead, whatever. The other two congressmen were Muhlenberg from Pennsylvania and another Virginian fellow named Venable. And Hamilton said, my family's up in New York visiting my in-laws. Come over to the house tonight, we'll talk. So they come over and they find that Hamilton says, you're right, I'm having an issue with funding, but I am not taking government funds. I am not speculating. I am paying blackmail to this fellow Reynolds because I'm having an affair with his wife. And the three of them immediately say, that's nobody else's business. And Monroe makes a point of saying that, and Hamilton's very appreciative of it. But when they go back and write the reports, Monroe writes a report and he sends it back to his friend and mentor, Jefferson. And then he goes off to France for, almost 4 years to serve as the minister to France. When he returns, the story has been outed by Callender's publication. And it was actually given to him, it's most likely from the Secretary of Congress, a fellow named Beckley, who couldn't stand Hamilton. But Hamilton's convinced it's Monroe. And when he finds out that Monroe's with his in-laws in New York down the street from Hamilton with his in-laws, he immediately sets up a meeting. And they sit down and they are going back and forth. And Monroe's saying, I didn't do this. I didn't release any of this. And finally, when Hamilton says, you're nothing but a scoundrel, both men jump to their feet and it's okay, pistols, swords, or fists, and they decide on pistols. Yeah. And it was that close. Much a matter of honor at the Code Duello. Yeah. And they don't fight their duel, but there's still a lot of, scratching back and forth and knock this chip off my shoulder for months, even after they have decided not to fight the duel. But Monroe was that rabid a partisan. And I think the amazing thing to me is his maturity. You start to see it especially when Madison picks him to be his next Secretary of State in 1811. And he and Madison had a falling out. They were very friendly.
Yeah.
But Monroe was at one point the minister to England trying to end the impressment of American sailors, and he gets this close to it. And but that's not good enough. And so he comes back very angry at both him and Jefferson. Of course, Jefferson, he's perfectly happy with after a meeting. That's Jefferson's personality. But Monroe starts to expand his look at the world when he becomes Secretary of State.
Mhm.
And by the time he's president, he's decided that it's important to be, as he put it, the chief magistrate of all of the people. And so now the person who he's going to use as his role model is Washington. And he's wonderful.
With whom he had a falling out,
Yep.
and with whom he also had a falling out with Jefferson, his mentor. So it's not as though he was a lackey of these people, but he had it seems, I get from your book, that he seemed to have a balanced character, a balanced ethical and moral character, such that he could learn from his mistakes, and he could disagree with people on the level of principle. He could stand on principle and defend himself, and in so doing, he contributed as a statesman. That seems to come through.
I think that's accurate. Jefferson, he needed a mentor, and Jefferson fit that bill very nicely towards the tail end of the Revolution when Monroe has left the Continental Army because there's no advancement for him. I came out of this book, Mark, convinced that Jefferson, and I don't mean this in the thuggish way, but in terms of a leadership approach, that Jefferson's almost like the Don Corleone of American history. I mean, this guy could get people to do anything, and there was rarely a paper trail back to him in case it was an issue that wasn't popular.
Yeah.
But he says early when he meets Monroe, he writes to Madison and says, "Turn Monroe's soul inside out, and there is not a mark on it."
Yeah.
Obviously, as Monroe matures, there's more than enough marks. Yeah. But Jefferson sees the worth of molding Monroe and helping him, find who he really is.
Well, that's the case with mentors and mentees. They, the mentee, usually a younger person, they derive all the experiences from the older mentor. But there's got to be an understanding that the mentee has to stand up and be their own person eventually.
Oh, yeah, I mean, to paraphrase your book, while these three men are the best of friends, they do an awful lot of reasoning, arguing and refuting over time. And,
that's how we first met. We're going to take a break. I think this is our last break coming up. But Richard Dugan will inform me by the chat box. But this is great. In our next segment, I think it's our last segment. I think it's the last segment. I don't even know. I'm so engrossed in what you're saying. I'm not keeping track of my segments. But I want to know what you hope your legacy will be as an author, as a writer, and as a person. But I think that people really should read this book, because I find so many parallels between what Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Hamilton, and Aaron Burr, let's not forget him, went through, which really set the model for where we are today. So this is the last break that we're coming up on. Now we'll take it now, because I'm getting a signal from the control room that we should do that. Okay, so stay with us, folks, for the most exciting part of our interview. Is always segment number 5, where we talk about the legacy of our guest. Stay with us on KZSB AM 1290. And we're back. Thanks very much for staying with us through all of our segments. And thank you very much, Tim McGrath. This is the last segment, which we call the legacy segment, because this is where our guests always get to ruminate as to how their life actually will sort itself out. All of us, especially as we get older, as you and I are, Tim, we think about this more and more as we realize our mortality. So I'd just like to throw this out to you. What do you hope will be your legacy as a writer, as a historian, and as a person?
Well, I'm tempted to say, like I told you when you told me this was going to be your question, shucks, I don't know. And the fact that you're hitting me with this question on my 70th birthday sort of hits a nerve.
Happy birthday! Happy birthday!
Thank you. Your show is one of my presents today.
Okay, good.
I'll frame it more with the book on Monroe. That I went into this wanting to see what made this man tick, and I know we didn't have time to talk about some of the seminal issues such as his approach towards slavery, and how he's another one of the founding fathers that, you know, knew it was wrong but couldn't bring himself to doing anything earth-shattering in that field, or with Native Americans. But he was someone who was wise. He certainly wasn't, and people commented on it. If your two best friends are Jefferson and Madison, you are not going to be the brightest guy in the room. Everyone talked about his wisdom. And the proof in that, I think, is how he waited for the right time to release the doctrine he and John Quincy Adams, his Secretary of State, put together. And probably the neatest compliment he ever got is a letter from Jefferson, when Jefferson's reading what Monroe is proposing and writes back to Monroe and says, "This sets our compass." Can you imagine being a acolyte of Jefferson and Jefferson saying to you, "You just created the beacon of how we're going to exist in the world"? So I think hopefully all three books, Mark, were something where I wanted to find out more about John Barry, and then I wanted to find more about the other captains and the sailors, whether they be, you know, white Americans, Native American sailors, and African American men who fought in that. What was their experience like? And then with Monroe, how did this man, who we rarely know about, is always ranked somewhere between 7th and 15th among our presidents, how did he acquire that? Mm-hmm. And if you can pass along, you hope, the enthusiasm that you had for finding out about these guys and their faults and their wives. I mean, Barry's wife is remarkable. Elizabeth Monroe is the Jacqueline Kennedy of the founding mothers.
Yes.
But you just hope, and like you said earlier about history and civics, you know, our history is our collective bedtime story. And it always bothers me when I hear a kid saying, "Oh, history is boring." It's not boring. Your teacher isn't teaching it right.
Exactly.
If you can't reach in and tell a kid, you know, this remarkable story of all of us. And thanks to our expanding to include more Americans and more different aspects of their culture, be they Native American, African American, Hispanic, their sides of the story are just as compelling, and they enrich and complement ours. So if there's a hope for that, if somebody was to read one of those books and say, "Let me learn, I want to learn more about this," then I've done my job.
That's a fascinating way to describe our history, as our collective bedtime story. I just wrote that down. That's a beautiful expression. It's a beautiful phrase. I don't think you're going to have any problem in finding your niche as a historian when all is said and done, and when future generations look back upon what we have done and what we've tried to do. I don't think that you have anything to apologize for, because reading your book, and fortunately many people now do not trust the public school system, so they are taking more control of their children's education from elementary and secondary and even college and university. Homeschools are on the rise. Charter schools are all on the rise. I myself am now teaching an online class in critical thinking without any affiliation with any college or university. I could not do that even 5 years ago. It would be impossible. The technology wasn't even there. So I think that, Tim, you're setting a high bar for younger folks who, first of all, want to be writers, and secondly, who want to be writing about history. I'm going to make sure that a young former student of mine, his name is Christian and Walker, and he's at the University of Santa Cruz, and he wants to be a history professor. And I'm going to make sure that he gets this video and this audio, and I'm sure he will love it. So I want to thank you very, very much for being our special guest. And we look forward to your next book on Lincoln and Meade. Lincoln, Meade, and somebody else? Lee. Oh, how could we forget?
Yep.
How could we forget Bobby Lee? Oh, Bobby Lee. Well, anyway, thank you very, very much. We're going to be wrapping up, and I want to thank you and thank the station for allowing us to have you on as our special guest on Voices of Santa Barbara. See you later. Bye, Tim.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. And
All right, you're clear.
thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well done, Tim.
Well, that was easy. You're a hell of a conductor, kiddo.
Wow. Does the time go by quicker for you?
Oh, it does. It does, because
I
you
can't
keep
believe
reading all the things you're going to mention and stuff and so forth.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. And we could have done another hour because we didn't even talk about his presidency per se.
well, anytime, kiddo. If you want to pick that up later, that's
Good.
that's
Okay,
fine
good.
by
We'll
me.
have you back. We'll have you back on the show, and we'll just tell the folks who are listening, hey, forget about it. We're just going to talk about the presidency this time.
All right. Now, this was wonderful, Mark and Richard. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you,
All right,
Richard.
Very welcome. Thank
You
you.
made us look good and stand up.
He'll make us even sound better too. So that's pretty good.
Well, it was very nice of you guys. Really, really nice, Mark. I'm very much in your debt.
Great, and happy birthday again. And please give my regards to Sid, your in-house
I
counsel.
sure will.
All right.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. We're going to sign off now.